Good afternoon, everyone. You guys ready to move on to something other than GG? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to be working on Section I with all of you. So my objectives for today are that we're going to illustrate a working knowledge of Section I, active diagnoses, articulate the intent of Section I, interpret the coding options for each item, and apply coding instructions in order to accurately code practice scenarios. Section I is similar to the assessment that we currently complete with IRF-PAI version 1.3. The items in this section have been consolidated for version 1.4. Section I is only assessed at admission because they are used for risk adjusters. So this next slide shows how we're going from version 1.3 to version 1.4. So in version 1.3, which we currently do right now, peripheral vascular disease and peripheral artery disease are two separate codes that we code. Moving forward, we'll be coding it under one code, I0900. Diabetes mellitus, diabetic retinopathy, diabetic nephropathy, and diabetic neuropathy all currently have their own codes. And moving forward in October, they will have one code, which is I2900. And then there'll also be the code none of the above, which is I7900. It is important to record the presence of active diagnoses because select diagnoses, including peripheral vascular disease, peripheral artery disease, and diabetes mellitus, influence a patient's risks for developing or worsening pressure ulcers. So let's look at some coding instructions. A diagnosis that is active will have a direct relationship to the patient's current functional, cognitive, mood, or behavior status, medical treatments, nurse monitoring, or risk of death at the time of assessment. We're going to code a disease or a condition that are considered active and are documented in the medical record at the time of assessment. This section is a multi-select assessment, so you would check all that apply. There must be specific documentation in the medical record by a physician, a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, a clinical nurse specialist, or other authorized licensed staff, if allowable, under state licensure laws, that the diagnosis or condition is being considered active. So let's look at some areas of where we would find this in the medical record. Specific documentation areas in the medical record may include, but are not limited to, progress notes, admission history and physical, your physician assessment, your PAPI, patient assessment of physician evaluation, your transfer notes, and the hospital discharge summary. The physician or authorized licensed staff will specifically indicate that a diagnosis is active. So you want to check that you have an active diagnosis documented by a licensed practitioner. It is important to note that Section 24, comorbid conditions, on the front page of the IRF-PAI, and Section I, active diagnoses, may not always agree, which is okay. There are different rules to each section. So let's look at an example. The physician documents on the post-admission physician evaluation, or the PAPI, that the patient has inadequately controlled diabetes and requires adjustment of the medication regime. That is enough documentation and would not require any additional information from the physician. There was a documented diagnosis, and it was confirmed that the medication regime would need to be modified. Okay, so now we're going to do a practice coding scenario. So you're going to pick up your little handheld devices, and we're going to go over this next scenario. So Mr. A is prescribed insulin for diabetes. He requires regular blood glucose monitoring to determine whether blood glucose goals are achieved by the current medication regime. The PAPI documents diabetes. Mr. A does not have peripheral vascular disease or peripheral artery disease. How would you code section I? So talk at your table and to come up with an answer. Would you check A, peripheral vascular disease or peripheral artery disease? Check I-2900, diabetes. Check C, both I-0900 and I-2900. Or D, check none of the above. That was quick. All right, so everybody chose answer B, and that is correct. This would be considered an active diagnosis because the PAI documents the diabetes diagnosis and because there's ongoing medication management and glucose monitoring. So we'll try one more practice coding scenario. Mrs. I underwent a below-the-knee amputation. She requires dressing changes to the stump and monitoring for wound healing. Peripheral pulses are being monitored. The nurse practitioner's notes document peripheral vascular disease, the left below knee amputation, and uncontrolled diabetes. Blood sugars are being monitored and insulin doses are being adjusted. So again, you're going to use your polling device. Would you check A, PVD or PAD, B, diabetes, C, both PVD or PAD and diabetes, or D, none of the above? All right, so let's see what everybody picked. Perfect, 100%. Everybody chose C, both I-0900 and I-2900. Both of them would be checked because peripheral vascular disease and diabetes are considered an active diagnosis. The nurse practitioner documented it in both in her progress notes. The peripheral pulses and blood sugars are being monitored, as well as the insulin regime is being adjusted. So there's the rationale for that. So, in summary, section I is only coded at admission. This section is not new, just consolidated. There must be, in the medical record, documentation from authorized, licensed staff. And you also want to remember that your ICD-10 codes in item 24 of the IRF-PAI may not match your section I diagnosis. So let's take out your action plan. The following are some ideas to get you started. Think about how you currently complete the active diagnosis section in version 1.3. Does your process work, or are there opportunities for improvement? Maybe review your current documentation. Does it align with the changes with 1.4? And of course, as I always say to my kids, practice makes perfect. So practice coding a variety of scenarios. Okay, are there any questions about section I? So we're gonna need you to go over to the microphone.
Could you just explain a little bit more why section 24 and section I wouldn't match?
So both of those sections have different rules, and that's why they would not necessarily need to match. Are there any other questions?
Would you provide some additional examples of what you need someone to document to classify PVD or PAD as active. Checking pulses may not be ordered. Can you look at medication for anticoagulation, ABIs? We need some more examples for active diagnosis.
Sure. I can confer with the staff, and we can come up with some more examples for you for active diagnoses.
My question is, sometimes we get the patient with amputation due to a PVD or PAD, but our physician would say that condition is already resolved with the amputation. So do we still can we still code that, or because the amputation was due to that condition, but physicians will say, now with the amputation, it's already resolved. So can we still code that, or no?
So what I'm gathering your question is that a patient has come in, they had a history of peripheral vascular disease in one limb only.
Right.
They had an amputation, and now your physician is saying it's no longer active.
Right. So that then in that case we wouldn't code it.
Can you move?
In that case we just wouldn't code it because supposedly it's been resolved with the amputation, even though it's
Correct.
what led to the amputation.
Correct.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Excuse me. I would ask for additional clarification on that response, because to address the question that the lady posed here, peripheral vascular disease is systemic. So if it's present in one of the extremities, it's going to be present in the other. Unlike arthritis that might be due to injury to one knee, to fix a total joint, you fix that arthritis. Whereas PVD is going to be present in both extremities, not just the one.
I would say you need to refer back to what your physician is saying. And when I clarified her question, the question was that once the amputation took place, the physician is documenting that peripheral vascular is no longer present. So if your physician is documenting that, then you can't code that. While I agree with you that usually peripheral vascular disease is systemic and both limbs would be affected, if your physician says it's gone, it's gone. Are there any other questions that I can answer for you today? Okay. Thank you very much.